Today's podcast is sponsored by lighthousepowerbusiness.com.
June 3rd, Thomas Becket.
When the God who loves you is determined to rescue you, pay attention. Before Thomas Becket ever became a priest, like most young men in the 12th century, he loved the outdoors. For him, life was all about doing what he wanted to do, only what he wanted to do, and only when he wanted to do it. Tall and lean, his favorite thing to do was hunt with his trained falcon, one of the fastest birds in the world. One day, Thomas and his friend Reese went hunting, and Thomas loosed his falcon into the air to find an animal. The bird soared toward the river, where he'd swoop down on a duck or a goose or a water vole. Through the fields, Thomas galloped after the falcon, and Reese rode close behind. They'd scoop up what the falcon captured. As they galloped, the wind whipped through Thomas' cloak, and in the freedom of the hunt, he felt alive. When Thomas reined up the riverbank, the falcon flew above a splendid duck. Thomas and Reese would feast tonight. It was apparent the falcon hadn't knocked the duck out of the air. That web-footed wonder was bobbing on the surface of the river. He was taunting that falcon. It was like he was daring the falcon to try and catch him. The falcon took the bait, and with fantastic speed, he swooped down. At the last second, the duck dove underwater. The falcon had no time to slow, and it plunged hard into the rushing waters, and the current swallowed it. Thomas loved that falcon. He'd be a poor owner if he allowed the bird to drown. Leaping off his horse, Thomas dove into the river. The icy waters shocked Thomas' body and his mind, so much colder than he'd imagined. Suddenly, he realized how foolish he'd been to jump into a raging river. The water weighed down his cloak and his clothes, and the current hurled him further downstream. He was out of control. Thomas was quickly being swept away. He tried to think, had to protect his head. Get out. He flailed his arms and shouted for Reese, but the current drove him fast and hard toward the wooden wheel of the flour mill just ahead. The giant wheel turned and it thwacked the surface of the water, and it created a stronger current. It was pulling him in. If the paddles didn't crush him first, the rush of the water would certainly drown him. Reese frantically shouted toward the mill house in front of them. Somebody inside had to hear him and shut down the wheel, but its thundering drowned out his voice. The mill wheel rushed closer, and the paddles sliced through the water. Thomas was about to die. Tumbling forward now, he was a few seconds from the giant wheel. The next turn would crush him. Then the wheel stopped. The noise died. The current calmed, and Thomas floated. Soon Reese caught up to Thomas, and a miller peeked out of the mill. Shocked to learn there was a man in the water, he quickly fished Thomas out. Thomas figured the miller had heard Reese's cries for help. Surely that was why the mill had stopped. But when he and Reese thanked the miller for stopping the wheel, the old man shook his head. He'd only stopped the mill because it was time to stop the mill. He turned it off every day exactly at this time. Thomas' eyes widened. Had it been any other time, even a minute off, he could have been killed. When Thomas returned home and told his mother what had happened, she was awestruck at how God had miraculously saved him. Thomas realized his brush with death was a wake-up call, that he ought to serve this powerful God instead of himself. Thomas went on to become the unofficial head of the Anglican bishops in England. Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Can you remember a time when you needed help? When the God who loves you is determined to rescue you, pay attention.
Well, hey man, this is Eric Bloom, one of the pastors at Landing Place Church in Commerce City, Colorado. The first thing that I am impacted by in this video about Thomas Becket is that he owned a falcon and that he trained that falcon to hunt. I didn't even know that was an option. I've heard of bird dogs. I've never heard of people hunting with falcons. And so I thought that was pretty unusual and pretty epic. And I almost started YouTubing videos on how to train falcons. But nonetheless, something that was unusual for me was very normative for him. This story was about just a day in the life of him and his buddy going hunting. And all of a sudden, this normal day becomes a life and death situation, which ends up becoming a transformative moment in his life. This story really isn't about him becoming archbishop at all, or even the political power that he ascertained later on, or that God used him in. It's really like an origin story of sorts. And I guarantee that throughout his life, he remembered this moment, and that marked him. And this was a testimony for him that he carried with him for the rest of his days. And as I listen to his story, I'm reminded of some of the ways that God has taken normal days in my life and turned them into transformative moments. Not necessarily life or death, but I was just going about my day, and all of a sudden, God intervened, and that marked me. And when I remember those moments, that causes me to really think about, how am I living now? And what ways am I fearful of the future, that when I remember something God has done, it gives me faith for the future. So, man, I want to encourage you right now to take a moment, wherever you're at in your day, put your plans and your tasks aside for a few moments and take some time to remember, how has God turned a normal day in your life into a transformative moment? And to spend some time remembering that, and let the Spirit minister to you, whether you find yourself fearful of the unknown or just kind of going through the motions of just to remember, how has God turned a normal day into a transformative moment that has marked you for the rest of your days. Be blessed, guys.
Today's podcast is sponsored by lighthousepowerbusiness.com. Get your free strategy session valued at $1,000. Get expert advice and take your business to the next level. Visit lighthousepowerbusiness.com to schedule your session today.